Is a teaching video for Tuesday of Q2 Week 2. We are in Unit 4 of AP English Literature and Composition, and we're working on analyzing structural contrast. In other words, contrast in the form of when events contrast in a story, like a narrative fiction. So this is just a slide that's a screenshot from AP Classroom. So contrast could be characters, such as character foils. It could be contrasting settings, day to night, night to day, rainy to sunny, things like that. Or it could be contrasting plot events. Okay, so these are all different functions or sort of like reasons for those sorts of contrasts. So for one, they could create balance. Think of sort of like a yin and a yang. They may move the plot forward, right? Just like if something happens, a plot twist, something you didn't expect, that makes you want to keep reading, right? So it's just moving the plot forward. Or it can elucidate ideas, in other words, theme development. All right, this is straight from the manual. So you have this information in the front of your unit packet, but I wanted to break it down a little bit. So, College Board says, the arrangements of the parts and sections of a text, the relationship of the parts to each other, and the sequence in which the text reveals information are all structural choices made by a writer that contribute to the reader's interpretation of a text. So all that to say, the same thing I've said in many different ways already over the course of this class, everything that you see on the page is a choice that was deliberately made by a writer, and all of those choices add up to how we can understand and interpret that given text. So part of it could be the arrangement, part of it could be the relationship, right, from one event to the next, from one sequence to the other, and then very specifically, like they can make a choice related to sequence. So I'm going to get to the sequencing part a little bit more in focus in a second, but just a note about arrangement. So it's helpful to know that texts, especially if they're from the 19th century or earlier, are pretty predictably arranged. So what I mean by that, for example, is that we as readers can expect portions of writing to be focused on like exposition or description of characters and setting at the beginning of a narrative. All right, so that's the phase when you just want to gather information. Think of it as the same way if you're getting to know someone, whether as a friend or otherwise, you ask getting to know you questions. So an author is going to provide that sort of information at the beginning of most texts, and we can see that in Rip Van Winkle. Nothing really happens, quote unquote, so to speak, for the first couple of pages. We're really just getting a lot of detailed information about the Catskills, right? The setting, that period, colonial America, and the people. Rip Van Winkle, his conflictual relationship with his wife, Dame Van Winkle, and his kids. All right, and as well as their relationship with other people in the village or in that town. Okay, so back to this, right? The relationship of the parts to each other. Sections may contrast, right? Like we can see a contrast between Rip's relationship with townspeople, like other women in the town, versus his really problematic, troubled relationship with his own wife. All right, and then just a little note here in terms of like irony and plot twists. That's all in contrast, okay? When our expectations as a reader are subverted, when what we expect to happen does not happen, that is a contrast. All right. Now, the sequence in which the text reveals information contributes to the reader's interpretation of a text. Now, this is me telling you, like, very specifically, yes, you should be annotating, but what should you be annotating in addition to just like cool quotes, defining words that you're unfamiliar with? You should annotate for these narrative building blocks, especially with short stories, right? Because a lot happens. It might not always feel like it, might feel slow, but a lot happens in a little space, right? So we want to note, rising action, or just write down and kind of bracket off the text to say, this is where conflict is arising, or write down internal conflict, or write down external conflict, or write down conflict between protagonist and their surroundings, right? Setting, that kind of thing. And then climax, turning point, things like that. Just straight up write climax, turning point, rising action, conflict, resolution, maybe even denouement in the margins as you annotate. The differences highlighted by a contrast emphasize the particular traits, aspects, or characteristics important for comparison of the things being contrasted. All right, so this is kind of going back to, what we were talking about here, arrangement of parts, et cetera, et cetera. Well, like now what? What do those contrasts do? They oftentimes emphasize something, right? Again, think of a yin yang, right? The black and the white against each other make those respective sides stand out. Okay, so we can think of a contrast as almost putting something in bold, which has me as a reader beg the question, why? Why is this being emphasized? Why does that matter? Contrasts often represent conflicts in values related to character, narrator, or speaker perspectives on ideas represented by a text. Okay, so this is important to note that conflicts often arise because of differing values between two or more characters, or differing values between a character and their surroundings, right? They're sort of like cultural or social context, which we see arise when Rip Van Winkle wakes back up 20 years later and he does not fit in as well as he used to. All right, and this is kind of the last slide here. Contrasting plot events, what does that often do? That moves the story along. It also creates conflict. When values conflict, that usually means people conflict, and that creates tension, and tension also moves the story along, right? Because we like the tea, and so that's conflict and contrast. Contrast being a type of conflict brings the tea to the story, makes you want to keep moving forward, keep reading, keep drinking that tea. All right, contrasts and disparities between a character's stated values and beliefs and their actions, right? If they say that one thing is important to them, but they do not act in accordance with those values, that right there might lead to what we call character complexity, or, humanity, that we are all imperfect, trying our best, or sometimes not even trying our best, depending on the day, but we're all trying, right, to a certain level. Thinking of like Leonie from Sing Unburied Sing, we can see the complexity and the fact that she wants to have a good relationship with her children, but she doesn't always act in accordance with that, right? So note and name the way a protagonist or another major character handles conflict. And then if you analyze that, that's going to help you to uncover theme. And we're going to touch back on that next class.